The door of Lance's cell opened, and two large Galra entered. One was holding two long iron sticks. Then Lance focused and instinctively bolted. The other Galra grabbed him and pinned him face down to the floor. His neighbor had owned cows. He knew branding irons when he saw them. The Galra lifted his shirt far above his head to expose his shoulders. He was seared twice with each one. Then they pulled out a bottle and began to apply the acid to his burns, causing the flesh to remain dented and not heal over. The acid also made the skin darker, so that it made the images stand out. Then they poured a different bottle onto the wounds, a type of oil to seal and finish the job. After they left, Lance lay still and tried not to move too much. "The Galra," said the other prisoner, speaking for the first time, "have not used brands on slaves for the last 15,000 years. "Don't stroke my ego," Lance gasped. "Are you a Blade member?" The prisoner narrowed his eyes. "I know them personally," Lance said. "I lovingly call them Marmorites. I don't think they like me very much, though. Our personalities don't match. You seem to be the kind of silent but deadly type they are." "Indeed," he replied seriously. "I do not doubt that." Lance laughed and then said, "Say, if I can get you out of here, would you do me a favor?" The other took his time answering, but then said, "Foolish hope is worse than death." "Do I look like a con man to you?" Lance asked, insulted. "I wouldn't offer if I didn't already have something underway." "You think you can get out of a fortified Galra prison?" "Oh, I know I can," Lance said, inching his shirt back down over his back and wincing. "The question is, do you want to come along? And if you do, will you help me out with a little something I gotta do?" The Galra looked the human up and down. He looked weak, but there was a confidence in his speech and face that the other prisoner found himself begrudgingly starting to trust. "If you get us far away, then I will help you," he said, and watched the human's eyes glitter mischievously. Lance replied, "There is no if when I'm this angry." He was finally alone. Lance was now hooked up to a large vat of quintessence, as it slowly dripped into his arm like an IV. They had discovered that he only had an episode where he'd go into writhing pain, after the substance was no longer being added to his bloodstream. They also found out that they could add as much as they wanted. "It's like every time the quintessence is added, it stored itself into a never-ending pool." The dealer was beside himself when he showed his results to the witch. "It just keeps expanding." The witch had sent him to go fetch more quintessence, leaving him alone with a needle in his arm. Humming to himself, he slipped a long wire out of a hole he had made in the leg of his pants. A button by the computer would release the main restraints, and then it would be easy to unstrap himself. Getting the wire to the button was the hardest part. He noticed it was a light touch button, so even getting the wire to pass over it would do the trick. He stood and stretched once that part was done. Getting ready for part 2, he steadied his breathing. He would have approximately 30 minutes before he'd buckle and have an episode. In 30 minutes, he had to sneak into the storage room he'd found a while back when the dealer had gone off to find an extra drug that had fallen to the floor. After he got the blade from the room, came part 3. He'd have to make it to the cells and get the Marmorite out, hopefully all before he was found out, because part 4 was booking as fast as ridiculously possible to the hangar and hijack the nearest ship. Lance took a deep breath and removed the needle. The Galra prisoner hadn't really believed that the human could help him escape. He had felt what he thought was trust, because of the human's confidence. But it truly was impossible. So why was the human standing outside his cell with not only the code to open it, but his blade? "Look, I got about 10 minutes, he panted, handing the blade over. That's when the alarm started to blare. The Galra didn't have time to be shocked. He unsheathed his knife and used his will to open the weapon. It had been a long time since he'd held his old friends. As the knife grew, it separated into twin blades. "I may be out of practice," he said, "but I will carve our way out of here." "Fantastic!" The human clapped his hands. "Let's go!" They ran, and the Galra quickly felt all the years he'd spent immobile and not keeping up his stamina. His desire for freedom, however, pushed him. "The hangar is over here," the human shouted, and the Galra moved swiftly, cutting down everyone. It was strangely easy. There weren't a lot of soldiers, but there were a lot of sentries. Too many robotic sentries. It was pathetic. No wonder the human was so confident. "Get it! Don't let it escape!" The shriek came from the hooded figure of Hagar. His feet moved a little faster with the added fear. They jumped into the nearest pod they came to. The human ran to the controls while the Galra was fending off anyone who came near. "Well, this is nice," the human called. "Come on in." The door started to close, and he jumped in at the last moment. And they were off. Jets and other ships were following close behind, trying to shoot them down. "And you take over." The human collapsed and tossed the sentry arm away from him. The Galra didn't even see him pick it up. He didn't understand why he would need it. "So," the human said, grinning up at him, "I'm going to have a meltdown here. Just make sure I don't slam my head against anything. Okay?" "I do not understand," the Galra said, putting most of his focus into avoiding the other ships. When a scream ripped into his focus, he thought his heart would stop. Turning around to look, he saw the human in intense pain. He wanted to help, but he needed to get the ship away from the enemy. "Endure," he said as he turned back to his controls and did his best to ignore the cries behind him. One must endure. They were safe. The Blade member sat next to the human who had stopped screaming but was still shaking and weak. He couldn't believe it. He had resigned himself to die behind bars. He was free. The human tried to speak. "What is your name?" "Jigropa," he replied. "It is first Galran for Windswept." "Yeah," the human tried to smile. "I can't pronounce that. How about I call you Rio? Or Gigi. Actually, I'm fond of Gigi." "Gigi? Rio. I guess we'll have to see what sticks," he said, closing his eyes and sighing. "Told you I could get us out." "Yes," Gigi said. "May I ask your name as well?" The human thought for a moment. "I don't really have a name anymore," he said. "Why don't you come up with a name for me? This is a new chapter in my life. I think I should have a new name." It was hard to argue, but Gigi still felt cheated. Names were not something he believed to be taken lightly. This human was discarding the name of his birth, and in such a flippant manner. There was no shame in this human. No shame. "I shall call you Meltak," Gigi said, and saw the human grin. "I like it. Thanks."